Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining. Start in 1 second. All right. So, last week we discussed the holiday of Purim. We discussed Megillas Esther a little bit. This week, we're going back to the Parsha, and we're up to Parsha Ki Sisa. There's a few main themes in the Parsha. One of the big things is the story of the Jewish people and the golden calf. So let's go over the story, and we'll go through some of the one of the ideas that's brought. So the Torah tells us, right, that Moshe Rabbeinu goes up to Shemayim. He goes up the mountain. He talks to God, and he gets the 10 Commandments. Right after Mount Sinai, and the 10 Commandments are said by God. Moses goes up to the mountain after 40 days. He tells, "Listen, I'm going to be back in 40 days." And 40 days later, he comes back with the tablets. Meanwhile, the Jewish people miscalculated, and they come to Aharon, they come to Moshe's brother, and they say, "Look, Kizem Moshe Ha'ish, Moshe is dead. He must have died. He went up there. It didn't work out. Kum Aseilanu Elokim, make us a god, right? Make us a god because we don't know what happened to Moshe." So Aaron says, "Listen, I need a stall, right? Because he realized Moshe Rabbeinu is coming. Moses is coming back. He needs to stall. So he says, go to your wives, go to your children, ask them for the jewelry, and we're going to put it in a pot. And we're going to make something, and he figured if they go to the wives, they go to the children. The wives and children are going to stall. And I say, take my gold for what? So he didn't realize that how passionate they were about this situation, and they throw it in. They take off their own jewelry. The men take off their own jewelry. They give it to Aharon, and he doesn't know what to do. So he puts it in the pot, and some of the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude from Egypt, some of the Egyptians who came with the Jewish people out of Egypt, they do some sort of witchcraft, some sort of sorcery, and the golden calf comes out, right? And Aharon was totally shocked, didn't know what to do. He tried stalling them till tomorrow. They get up early in the morning and they worship the golden calf, and Moses sees the golden calf, right? We all know what happens. He breaks the tablets. That's the story. All right, so that is one of the... So what we're going to focus on today is this sorcery, this act of witchcraft, sorcery that they did in order to make this golden calf appear. But it's not even the first time in the Torah that we have sorcery, right? We know that it says that the Pharaoh had sorcerers, right? And they called Chartumim in Hebrew. His Chartumim, his sorcerers, tried to emulate everything that Moses and Aaron did. He tries to emulate it. Bilam as well. He who would later curses Jewish people. He also used sorcery, right? He was going to curse the Jews in order to annihilate them. The Amalek, right? We just come from Purim, and on Purim, right? Haman is a descendant of Amalek. We talked about Parsha Zachar. All these things, they also use sorcery. It says that Moshe had to choose men who knew how to combat that. In the land of Israel, King Saul approaches. He approaches a sorcerer, okay, which again the Torah specifically outlaws this, right? But King Saul at that time, the prophet Samuel had passed away, and he had killed the high priest, so there was no high priest to consult with the Urim V'Tumim. Last week's Torah portion has the mitzvah to make a choshen, to make the breastplate. In the breastplate are names of God written on it, and they would consult it says you could consult the breastplate, and the names would light up, but which obviously is not sorcery. That's a godly thing. So Saul approaches a sorcerer to communicate with the dead, to communicate with Shmuel, and he gets advice, right? So the question is sorcery a real thing, right? The Torah clearly says you're not allowed to do it. We have stories in the Torah that combat sorcery. We have obviously the golden calf story, right? So is sorcery, is it real? So before we get into is sorcery real, we have to get into what is considered sorcery. Okay, so we're going to go into a story. Okay, we know that in that technology has been technology since forever, right? Has been one of those controversial things in Judaism. For example, like the printing press, go all the way back. The printing press was used. Some people even think that the printing press, the first things printed on Gutenberg's printing press were Jewish books. Whether or not that's true is irrelevant. But the Jews always used the printing press. However, people said no. The printing press is not good, right? You could print bad things, right? And then came more modern technology like the radio. So I believe it was in 1960, the Lubavitcher Rebbe told one of his Hasidim to make a Tanya class, to teach the Tanya on the radio, and people got very upset. And they said, "How can you use the radio? The radio, it comes from Klippa, it comes from the other side, it comes from bad, from bad." So the Rebbe addressed this, and I think this idea will help us understand what exactly is sorcery and what sorcery is capable of doing. Okay. So the Rebbe explained. They said, how can you use the radio? The radio is a bad thing. So the Rebbe said, how can you say that the radio comes from bad when something bad has no ability to create anything? The only thing that could create something is God, right? So for example, it says Bereshis bara Elokim asher shamayim v'ha'aretz. It's the first verse in the Torah, right? God, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, right? And it says, what does it mean that God created the heaven and the earth? It means that he created everything that's going to be created ever was created by God himself. Okay? Because only God could create something from nothing. Alright? So that includes anything. Anything that is ever created, if there's an invention, right? What does it mean as an invention? You take something that already exists and you develop it into something else. That's an invention. That's a creation, right? An artisan doesn't create a pot out of nothing, right? He creates it out of something that already exists. So anything that comes from something that was created by God at some point. So obviously the Rebbe explained that the radio obviously is not something that it doesn't come from outside sources. It's created by God, right? If you say about a pot is created by God, then for sure the radio is created by God. Okay, and let's go even to the Talmud. The Talmud says that it's brought in this verse after the third plague of the plague of lice. It says Vayomer Chartum al Pari Etzba Elokim Hi. The sorcerers told Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." What does it mean, the finger of God? So Rabbi Eliezer said, from here we see that a demon cannot create something smaller than a grain of barley. As a result, the sorcerers were unable to replicate the plague of lice, and even they understood it was not magic but an act of heaven. Okay, so even so he said that from there they realized, because they were dealing with lice, and lice is smaller than a grain of barley. It was a grain of barley? Yeah, a grain of barley. So therefore they said this must be the work of God. The Talmud continues. Rabbi Papa said, in the language of a vow, okay, meaning he was saying, he's disagreeing with the previous rabbi, Rabbi Eliezer, and he says, even a creation the size of a camel they cannot create. Even something really big they can't create. They do not create anything. Larger creatures they bring from other places, and smaller creatures are too difficult to collect. So Rabbi Papa said, no, it's not that they create these things. It's that they can't create anything. Only God could create. So what does it mean that these people, they couldn't create something big? What they do is they have a demon, and it goes and it brings it from one place to the other, right? But these small little things, they can't get demons to get involved with. Okay? And the story in the Talmud, in the Jerusalem Talmud, similar story. Rabbi Yanai said, I was walking in the town of Tzipori when I witnessed a heretic take a snake skin, throw it in the air, and it landed and turned into a calf. Okay? So Sounds like an interesting story, right? He throws a snake skin, it becomes a calf. Sounds like some sort of sorcery. So Rabbi Eliezer said, in the name of Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra, if all humankind came together, they would not be able to create even a mosquito and endow it with a soul. Right? So the truth is, sorcery cannot create anything. Not even a mosquito. Not even the smallest thing. He said this heretic didn't take a snake skin, throw it in the air, and create a calf. Rather, he summoned a demon to steal a calf from a barn and bring it to him. So we see this idea that sorcery cannot create anything. Right? What can it do? It's an illusion, essentially, right? It could change things and make it look like what you're seeing is that it's creating something, right? So, again, going back to what the Rebbe was talking about, right? We see that the Torah, everything was created b'shvil haTorah. Everything was created for the Torah and for the Jewish people. So, if everything was created for the Torah and for the Jewish people, then obviously, radio waves, right, have to be used for. What were they really created for? They were created for good. The fact that some people use it for bad, right, doesn't mean that it's actually a bad thing, right? And he gave even a simpler example from a donkey, right? We know that Abraham, our forefather, used a donkey to go to the binding of Isaac, right, to the Akedas Yitzchak. He put Yitzchak on a chamar, right, on a donkey, and he saddled his donkey, and he put his stuff on there, and they rode the donkey. But we see, and Mashiach will also use a donkey, however, we know that Bilam also used a donkey, right? Bilam, we mentioned earlier, he was a sorcerer who was going to curse the Jewish people. He also got on a donkey, who later talks to him, right? And all that whole story, we'll get to another day. But Bilam also used a donkey, right? So does that mean a donkey comes from a bad thing? No, a donkey was really made. Why was the donkey created? It was created for good things, just because someone misused it. Okay. Let's continue down this topic. So another story. The Mishnah relates that the Romans asked the sages, if God does not want people to worship idols, why does he not just remove it? Right? So it's very simple. If God is almighty and he doesn't want us to worship idols, why does he get rid of the competition? Right? Just get rid of idols. So the sages answer them, had they been serving something the world does not need, he would remove it. Right? It's true. If they were serving something the world didn't need, God would remove it. But they worship the sun, the moon, and the stars. So must the world be destroyed because of these fools? In other words, right? So they're serving things, but we need them, right? God created these things they have a real purpose, right? So again, the same idea when it comes to radio, right? And that was obviously in the 1960s. When it comes to, in our generation, the internet, right? Or social media, whatever the soup of the day is, of the thing that people say is bad, right? The truth is, they're necessary, and they were created for good. So just because somebody who is a fool, right, so to speak, uses it for bad, doesn't make it, in essence, bad. On the contrary, it's a good thing. Okay. So now, let's continue about what is sorcery, is witchcraft a real thing? So, we'll start with Maimonides, okay? Maimonides says as follows. These ideas are all utter falsehood, and they swayed idol worshippers in the past to follow them. It is not befitting for Jews, who are wise, to be drawn to such nonsense, and to even consider that there might be value in them. Okay, so Maimonides clearly says, and he continues for a whole long thing, that witchcraft, right, and which is a form of idolatry, okay, is nonsense. And he even brings a verse, says there is no divination against Jacob, no evil omens against Israel. It's a verse in Bamidbar, okay, that they're basically saying there is no such thing as idolatry. Okay? Now, if we continue, Nachmanides, the Ramban, he says as follows in his commentary on Deuteronomy. He says, now, understand how magic works. When God created the world from nothing, he made the upper beings rule over the lower beings. He gave the natural power of control over the earth, and all upon it the stars and constellations according to their patterns, as can be observed by those well versed in astrology. In addition to the stars and constellations, God created angels and spiritual forces to be their soul. Okay, so God created a system where he gave, right, so for example, let's just use something simple as the sun, right? The sun creates energy, the energy gives life to the earth, and that's how things grow. So he says as follows, this is the secret of witchcraft and its power. The Talmud says that these forces contravene the heavenly legions. This means that they are contrary to the natural forces and can circumvent them. The Torah forbade their use because God wishes for the world to operate according to nature. Okay, so according to Nachmanides, is that it's kind of like a unnatural power to the world. That's what witchcraft is, right? It disrupts the natural universe. Okay, so let's break down this debate. So Maimonides, like we said, Maimonides says that it is fake, right? That there's nothing real to it. But everyone agrees, whether it's Maimonides or Nachmanides, they both agree that sorcery cannot create something from nothing, right? As we mentioned earlier, only God who himself, right, has that ability because he is something from nothing. God has no origin, okay? God is the origin of everything. So therefore, only God could create something from nothing, okay? And however, Maimonides, however, maintained that even transformation cannot be accomplished using any form of magic, and all paranormal forces are false, fabricated, empty, and void. Okay? Now, so that's Maimonides. So, but not, like we mentioned, Nachmanides says that there is some sort of truth to it. So, whenever we come to a dispute in Judaism, in Jewish law or Jewish ideas, we always try to minimize, okay, that what is the dispute? So number one is that we can say that even if there was once upon a time sorcery, everybody agrees that nowadays there is no sorcery, right? That the sorcery maybe there was at one time, right? But even at the times of Nachmanides and Maimonides, they were similar time frame. Everyone would agree that even then there was no more sorcery. The question was, the sorcery that's recorded in the Torah, was it real or was it only an illusion? Okay? Now, we know that, so how can you say, so wait a second, if you say that there was one sorcery, that means, why can't there be sorcery now? Well, we know that many things change, right? For example, the lifespan of people, right? In the generations prior to the flood and post the flood until Abraham, right? People lived for hundreds of years, right? And then at some point, God said, okay, average lifespan is 120 years, and anything more than that was considered extraordinary, right? But we know Adam lived 930 years. Methuselah, right, famously lived the longest. He lived 964 years. Even Noah lived 600 plus years. So we see this idea that that nature changes. So in other words, maybe there was a point in nature that nature was able to be, moved by some other forces. The nature today is that those things don't exist, and therefore sorcery definitely does not. Not only is not no longer relevant, but also it cannot have any bad influence on us. Now, what's also important is to realize that you could also say that Maimonides was trying to, whenever we make a Torah law, right? The Torah is telling us a law. It actually makes the reality in the world. I don't know if we mentioned the story before, but even in the times of the Talmud, right? We know that the law of the Torah actually outdoes the law, so to speak, the way it is in heaven, because the Torah was given to us to study as human beings. So when somebody makes a Torah, when somebody establishes a Torah law, actually that is the nature of that actually changes what's going on, right? That means this became the Torah law, not because it's in heaven like that, but because it's on earth like that. So if you look at it like that, then maybe Maimonides was actually trying to nullify sorcery and witchcraft by saying that it doesn't exist. But we'll leave that for another time. I'll just say one last story, that once a woman was worried about magic, and she wrote to the Rebbe about it, and he wrote back to her as follows: "Explain to her the words of Maimonides. There is no reality at all to magic. Check your tefillin and mezuzahs, or I guess her husband's tefillin. I will mention this at the resting place of my father-in-law." Okay, so we see here that, and in a similar story, the Rebbe wrote as follows: "Forget entirely about the notion that someone from India or elsewhere can harm you, God forbid, for God watches over you. You should stop thinking about idols and the like, because there is nothing to them whatsoever. This is only your imagination and nothing more. Check the mezuzahs. So again, similar idea. We see that the Rebbe clearly felt that Maimonides' establishing of Jewish law, that there is no such thing as sorcery nowadays, even if there once was. And Maimonides seems to say that there really never was, and it's just an illusion, right? So Nachmanides takes the opinion that it's real, and Maimonides takes the opinion that it's an illusion. So, but the bottom line is that whenever somebody comes to you and says, "Oh, I'm going to curse you and put a spell on you," that if we consider it like nothing, then it really won't have any harm on us, right? If you notice in the answers that the Rebbe gave, he said it wasn't just enough to check your tefillin, which obviously are good things for yourself, but also to not think about it, right? To kind of like Maimonides saying, it's not real, don't think of it as real, right? The Baal Shem Tov says, wherever a person's mind is, that's where they are. So if you consider something real, right? If you get caught up in it, it'll be real. It'll live, as they say, rent-free in your head, right? But if you look at it instead as, this is nothing, don't worry about it, this is nonsense, it won't have an effect on you. Okay, have a good Shabbos, and we'll see you next week.